And I guess I'll reintroduce myself. This is Pete Duranzio with PD Programming, and we're going to do our CrashMagick mini training for beginners starting right now. So as I mentioned, we're going to be using Plano as our sample data and configuration for today. One thing to note is most of the time when you start the program, you will be going to this page, governmenttools.com, and clicking on CrashMagick Hosted. That's where everyone who we have hosted on our system will run the software. If you're not an agency that is hosted with us, and there's only a couple of those. I think the state of Missouri, state of North Dakota, and 1 or 2 cities are locally hosted. Other than that, you'd be coming here. Today, where I'm working is in CrashMagick Demo, and you won't be able to log into Demo unless you have a special account set up there, which I do, and you'll notice that it says Demo up here. All that means is it's a second instance of the program that will contain somewhat different data, and today it will contain our very latest version of the software. We'll be releasing this week. It may actually happen today. It may happen tomorrow afternoon, but we will be releasing it this week, and you will see as we run it today, hopefully everything is working pretty well, and it has a couple of new features. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to log in, and so when you get first use of the software, you will be given a login name, and you'll be given a password. The passwords for all new users that we provide look like this. They're ABC123 exclamation mark. The first time you use that, it's best to go in and change it. So to change it, you would simply enter that here, your ABC123 exclamation mark, and click on change, and you'll have the opportunity to change it. Once you have that, your login looks like this. So you'll put in your user ID, your password, you'll pick your agency. Some of you have a special type of configuration where, we don't have that listed on here, where you have multiple agencies. If you're a consultant, you may have multiple agencies listed, and what will happen is you'll log in as the consultant here, and a second list will pop up showing the agencies you have access to. Okay. You may have an analysis button. You will have an analysis button here. You may have a data entry button. The agency, City of Plano, does not do their data entry through our system, so they don't have a data entry button here. So I'll just jump straight into analysis, where most of you will spend your time. Again, I encourage you to jump in and stop me if you have any questions. Okay. I'm going to change to the project that you would see if you first logged in. This is what your screen will look like when you first log in. And from here, actually, I'd like to show you what this screen contains on it and what it would look like actually running the software for a little while. And that's why we had that sample up. So let me go back to the sample, and I'm going to click on one of these reports. And so given this report, I'm just going to show you an image that describes what all the parts of this screen are. So on here, we have the screen that we were just looking at. In the top right, we have some basic login, help, administrator functions. That's what's up here. And so this is your logout button. This is your help button. This is your administrator button, which you will only see if you are an administrator for your account. That means that you have the ability to add and remove users. You have the ability to share reports and do some other configuration options. This is the projects button. I just clicked on it a couple of times to switch between my projects. We'll cover that during the training, what that's used for. At the top center of the screen, you'll always see CrashMagick, and then you will see the name of your current project. And so main is the default project. Everybody will have a main, and even if you delete it, it will recreate it for you. Or if you rename it to something else, you'll have the something else, and immediately main will get recreated for you again. So you'll always have a main on your system. If you change projects, obviously it'll show that new name up there. In the top left, this entire section up here is used for creating new content. So in the top left most is the new study. The studies are used to gather data. It's the basis for all of the reports that you run. The first thing you have to do is tell it what data you want. Either you're looking for the data for an entire year or 2 years or 5 years, or you're looking for data for a time period and a location. In this example, perhaps 10th Avenue and 10th Street, or 23rd Ave and 27th Street. Those are studies where we've gathered the data for that location for this time period. And studies also contain something called a filter, where you can limit the data you see. So after you've chosen 23rd Ave and 27th Street, you might choose to only show pedestrian crashes at that location. And that's what this is right here where it says clear. That's a clear filter. You can also have pedestrian, bicycle, left turn, what have you, whatever you choose to pull from your data. So that's what the study is for, and you create a new study, and then with the new study you can then create reports. These are all of your reports in the second section here. So these are high crash location lists. These are collision diagrams. These are tabular listings, just a grid of data. These are charts. These are crosstabs where you're comparing one field against another, like time of day versus severity, or day of week versus type of collision, something like that. These are called layouts, and layouts are used to combine multiple reports into one single PDF, which can be very handy as a presentation mode or for sharing your data with someone else. Not shown here, that you'll see as soon as we hop back to the other screen, is a new icon, which is pin maps. And the pin maps are sort of in a basic stage right now, but what you'll see is that icon will be there in any of your studies you can produce a pin map for. Over here, a little bit further to the right, is specific reports that you've chosen to put there as essentially frequently used reports, frequently desired reports. So while any of these, if I was to click on a chart, for example, I might be asked, do you want a time of day? Do you want a day of week? Do you want a severity chart? Which type of chart do you want? Over here, they already specify a particular one. So one of these might be a severity chart, or might be a corridor diagram, as all of these are, a specific one. So these are essentially specific versions of any of these reports. They're shortcuts into any of those reports, and they therefore allow you to get there with just a single click. Okay, on the left-hand side is where we maintain the list of studies, which are the larger burgundy text up at the top next to the data table here. These are your studies. So I have a study for 10th Avenue and 10th Street. I have a study for 10th Avenue and 35th, 10th and 47th, and so on. Each of these is a study. The currently selected study is one called All Data, which is essentially a date range only study between 2010, for the year 2010 in this example. And so all of these are studies that have been created while I was working in the main project, and all of the reports that I've done for each of those studies. So when I was looking at 10th Avenue and 10th Street, I asked for a time of day chart. So it got placed inside of 10th Avenue and 10th Street. I also asked for a crosstab and a collision diagram. Those all fall in that same study. Note that when you're in a particular study like this, and you have some reports, if you change something about the study up here, it will affect all of those reports. So if I change the filter to pedestrian, my time of day, my crosstab, and my collision diagram will all only contain those pedestrian crashes at that point. So it makes it nice and easy to just jump between different types of data that you may be looking at. You can also copy and paste these, as you'll see, so that allows you to, for example, take 10th Avenue and 10th Street for this year with a clear filter, make a copy of that, and change that one to pedestrian so that you can show just your pedestrian crashes for that location as a separate study. Okay, so that's your project study tree. To the right over here is your reports. This is what you're headed for when you click on any of these, is you eventually want to get the output. And this blue tab will always contain that output, and it might be a collision diagram, might be a high crash location list. Any of these types of reports will appear in here. The green tab is for settings. This is where you change all the options that talk about how that report is displayed. And so you might, in the charts case, change the colors. You might change what the labels look like, what the header and footer look like on here, whether you want a legend, stuff like that, or things that you would change using the settings. Okay, down at the bottom of the screen, I have two real sets of buttons that I can use. One set of those buttons is operating on studies. So any of these three, I think there may be 4 in the program now. We'll take a look when we get back there. These buttons right here are specific to the studies that the study that you're looking at. So this is a filter, allows me to set the filter for the study. That's, again, this clear right here. This is the category list. This allows me to change what the highlighting will look like, the colors will look like based on a particular field, and we'll go into that. This is a category list that, again, applies to the entire study. This is a refresh button which was recently removed, and in its place there's an export button. I've recently had a request to replace the requery button, essentially refresh button, and we're discussing whether that's a necessary step. So what you'll see on there right now is an export, which allows you to export the data to Excel, to an XML format, to a comma delimited format, a number of different formats we can export to. Okay, a little further to the right, now all of these buttons and these buttons will occur for any type of report. So you'd have a print, a copy, or a copy and paste. There'll be a paste here if you've copied something. And these are for templates, which are a bit beyond today's discussion, but they allow you to save the settings for a particular report that you've created and then recover them, retrieve them back again in the future so you don't have to reset all those settings again. To the right of that will always be buttons that are specific to this one report. So in this case, I'm looking at the category list that I'm using for this chart. So that's the time of day category list. If I wanted to change that to severity or something like that, I'd click here and change that. And these three buttons let me change between bar, pie, and line graphs. So different settings for the chart type. If I was on a collision diagram, it would let me change the schematic, or it might let me export data related to the diagram specifically. If I was in a listing, it would show me a button I could click on to change the fields in my listing, or to sort or something like that. That's what would be down at the bottom of this. And last on here is the delete button. Be careful about what you're on when you click delete. If you are on a report, you'll be deleting just that report. So at this point, that's what I'd lose right now if I got rid of this as my time of day report. But if I was clicked on the all data and I clicked on the X, I would lose that study and all of the content under it. So all of the reports that were related to that study. Okay. Note that saving all of these does not really cost anything. There's no, not a whole lot of memory, not a whole lot of hard disk space or database. You don't have to worry about how much of this you accumulate. And the reason for that is all of the reports that you generate and all the studies you generate, they are merely the parameters to create those reports or studies. So we don't actually store all the data for 2010 in this report. All we store is, the user just wanted 2010 data, and they also wanted a time of day chart. So when you click on it, we generate that. So it's always live data. But as a result, there's not much stored behind this other than those parameters. Okay, before I leave this screen and jump back to the program and start running the program, are there any questions related to that? All right, we will leave the screen. So this is where we left it. I'm just going to click here to make sure I don't get timed out. After about 20 minutes or so, I believe is the setting on this one, you would be timed out. You need to log back in. If that does happen to you, when you come back, any work you've been doing has already been saved, so you won't lose anything when you get timed out. Same thing with exiting. If you just exit and come back, your work is still saved for you, again in this tree. So I encourage you actually to keep most of the projects and studies that you work on, unless you just know you're not going to need them ever again. I encourage you to just leave them there. You can always go back and reference them in terms of how you created a report or copy a report that you've already created. That's kind of useful. Okay. Well, the first thing I'm going to do, let's go back to our main, which is essentially where you would log in, where there's no studies available, no studies that have been created, no reports or anything. And so the question is, what do you do when you get here? Well, the main thing you can do is create a new study. That's your starting point for all of this, is get some data gathered. So I'm going to click on New Study. That's the exact same thing as if I had clicked on this New Study button up here. It's just centralized to let you know sort of that's where you need to go right now. So now I've got a study, and you'll notice that my study is for today, and there are no crashes today. So I've got 0 crashes coming from this query right now. And the type of study is a date range study, so it would be all crashes. We're not looking at a particular location or anything like that. So I'm going to go click on the Study Settings tab, and that allows me to change the parameters. Whether it's for a study or for a report, the green tab will always let you do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, let's take a look at a different time period. So I'll go from January 2016 to December 2016. And at this point, I can now run any report, and it will use these parameters to create that report. But something I will almost always do first is make sure, just a little bit of a sanity check, that I've got the data I think I want, that I intended. And so this button right here allows me to refresh the counts for both the query and for the filter, and it's showing me that there are 6,000 records during this time period. So I look at that and I say, okay, good, I've got the data that I'm looking for. Now I can go ahead and run my report. Because if I ran that and it said 0, it'd kind of be a waste of time to go run all these other reports. So the first thing I'm going to do, because I'm new to this data, I'm new to this agency, is I'm going to go click on the HiCrash location list. That will let me know where I'm going to find crashes and give me some places to create reports for. All right. Chances are you will either see this box that lets you choose a location list to run, and this will happen for any of these reports. You'll get a box that lets you choose, or it will jump straight into the report itself. The time when it'll jump straight into the report is if you've only got one option. So for many of you, there will not be a node location list. All you'll have is an intersection location list. And therefore, it won't ask you, do you want to run intersection location list? It'll just take you straight in. In this case, I'm going to select that. I'm going to click OK. And what this does then is it runs through all of 2016, finds your HiCrash locations, puts them in a list for you. This is by count, and ranks them for you. And these are their names. So I'm going to pick a couple of locations out of here. Let's look at Custer and West Parker, perhaps, and let's pick another one. I'm intentionally not picking highways. I guess I could choose an expressway. That's probably a fairly normal road, so I'll choose Central Expressway and 15th. And let's choose one more. How about Coit and West Spring Creek Parkway? So when I've selected these, and I note their counts over here, one of the things that I can do now is create reports based on this HiCrash location list. And because it's based on the list itself, as opposed to being sort of out of the blue, as opposed to the stuff up here, which is make a study, pick a time period, pick a report, once I've already selected a report and I'm going to act on it, that stuff all happens down here. So what I'm going to do is ask for collision diagrams. And these are all of the reports that I have available to me right now. And you can add to these reports, I can add to these reports. I'm going to choose the four-way intersection, which is a simple collision diagram for each of these locations. And I'll just click on this little plus here, and it says create reports for selected locations. So I click on that, and it tells me it's created 3 new reports from the HiCrash location list. And what you'll see that it's done is we had our all data for 2016 with a clear filter and no category list, and so it created all of these reports the same way, but instead of all data, it's now picked that specific location, but the same time period, same filter, same category list. So the study is essentially the same, except it's now, in this case, an intersection study. So you recall when we were looking at the all data study, all we had to choose from was 2 dates on that panel. I'm going to jump in and take a look at this Custer Road and West Parker. And you'll notice now, in addition to the dates that I have, I've also got a primary street and a cross street. And I've also got a count. And the study definition is no longer called by date or all data. It's now called intersection. And you'll see that on the study settings panel as well. This is where you get to choose. So when we had the all data, all we had was these 2 values available to us. Let's actually switch to that real quick. We'll do date range. And note we lose the 2 street boxes. Come back to intersection. We gain back the 2 street boxes. And you notice the count was changing during that time as well. We went all the way up to 6,000 again while we looked at the by date. So then you pick your 2 street names, and that's what you have for a study. And I've got my 58 crashes. So let's go back to that intersection. So there's your collision diagram for that location. And there are a number of features to the collision diagram, so I'm going to go through them. Are there any questions first on where we are now, where we just looked at the HiCrash location list, looked at the study for intersections and the study for by date data?
Pete, Rama had typed into the chat.
Yep.
about the crash list also including segment crashes?
Just catching that now. Thank you.
Yeah.
Rama, good point, and worth noting. I think everybody has probably experienced this. It's not only, by the way, the high crash location list that will contain segment crashes as well as intersection crashes, but any of your reports as well. So the study itself will contain segment crashes if you don't filter those out. For most people, filtering those out is the distance from the intersection. Some of you also may have a intersection-related field that you can use, or you may have your own criteria. All of that's done through filtering, and I'm going to show you filtering in just a little bit, but what that allows you to do is, for any reports, any studies actually that you have, you can limit the data that you're seeing. But it is accurate that what you're seeing when you look at an intersection study or at a high crash location list for intersections is you're seeing any crashes that have the primary and the cross streets specified in their data. If primary street was Custer and nearest cross street was West Parker, it's going to show up in this query. So we'll get into filtering a little later to see how you remove those crashes if you didn't want to see them in there. Tanya, please make sure that I cover distance from direction at a minimum when we get into filters. Thanks. Okay, so looking at the collision diagram, I'm going to zoom in on one of the crashes. So I'm just going to use my mouse wheel right here to look at the crashes. I could also be using this control right here to zoom in, and I can drag the diagram around. As long as I don't grab a crash, I can drag the diagram around. Okay, so there's a few things we'll want to see here. Number one, we have a label attached to each one of the crashes, and there's some graphics. The crash graphics themselves are generated at runtime as the program reads the data from the database. So each of these symbols has a meaning, and that's described down here at the bottom of the diagram in the legend. Some of these are pretty standard symbols, some of them we made up at some point, and some of them are suggestions from users in the past to make some things more clear. Okay, so the most basic thing you can do when you're looking at a collision diagram is you can click on the crash graphic. When you click on the crash graphic, the right-hand side of the screen shows you data that you've selected, that you've chosen to see, or fields you've chosen to see related to that crash. So this is that case number that we're looking at right here, and these are the values, the data values that went into creating this, this diagram, this collision graphic here. Most of you, when you first click on it, will actually see, oh, I thought we'd actually see a shared, we've prepared one for Plano already, and as a result, we don't have the very, very basic one. Some of you, when you first click on this, will only have a few fields. You'll have the date, the time, not even sure what the third field, and the case ID number. So you just have a very basic information. You can add to that list of fields. All I did was click right here, and when I click on that, I get to pick the fields that I want to show. So in here I have a simple click on, and again this was made for the city of Plano, so we'd already looked at some of their data and chose this for them. We have one that I created a few minutes ago called click on for pin maps, and when we get to pin maps I'll be able to see this information when I click on the pin map. But let's create a brand new one. So I'm going to click on new field list, and you'll notice that now I have one called Untitled, and if I click on Untitled it will allow me to edit that. I'm going to take just a brief moment to describe something that's changed in this box for those of you who have already seen this or who have played with the program and the box doesn't look completely familiar. This is a permanent change, and hopefully will make things more useful and clearer in the future. Normally this box had in it, if you wanted to edit this item, this untitled list, there was a button right here for edit. If you wanted to rename it, you came up here and you clicked on its name. If you wanted to duplicate it, there was a little button down here that said dupe or delete. We've put together all of the controls that act on this one selected attribute, this one selected resource, into one place. You'll notice this is highlighted in blue and it's in red, again highlighted in blue and red. This is your selected item and the things you can do. So you can edit it, rename it, delete it, or duplicate it. When I clicked over here, that was for a new list. When we play with filters, you'll see how this really helps us in the filter box, but I think it also helps a little bit in this box as well to sort of aggregate where everything is found. So pretty much any actions you're going to take on this resource will be done down here. And this dialog box is used for several things. It's used for your field lists, your click-on field lists. It's used for filters. It's used for when you do exporting. It's used for most times when you need to select something in the program. So we've got Untitled. I'm going to come back on track here and select Edit. And what I'm presented with is the list of all the fields that are in this client's database. Now for each of you, this list of fields will be different. I'm going to run through it and find fields that look like they're interesting to me. I believe activity ID is actually their case number in here. We can pick the age of driver 1 and 2. I'm going to hold down the control key to make these selections. I could use shift to get a whole bunch at once, or I can do the control and do one at a time. Here's an interesting one. I have add intersection. So that may be the field that Rama, you may want to use to identify which crashes to be included in the diagram. And I'll show you how that works in a filter after we get through this. Let's see what else is in here. Contributing factor perhaps would be interesting. When you see these ONE, THREE, TWO, and you see words spelled out at the end of one of these fields, that's for each of the vehicles. So in this case, it can look a little confusing. They have a field called contributing factor 1, 2, or contributing factor 1, contributing factor 2, and contributing factor 3 for each of the vehicles. So this is contributing factor 1 for each of the 3 vehicles, contributing factor 2 for each of the 3 vehicles, and so forth. So I'm just choosing, what I meant to be choosing actually was contributing factor 1 for each of the first 2 vehicles. I'll choose crash severity. I'll choose distance and direction from intersection. Grab lighting in there, manner of crash, the action of each of the first 2 vehicles, and we'll grab the direction. So again, I was holding down the control key that whole time so that all of these remain selected. Alternatively, I could just click on one, and I'll click on this button, and it would send that one over. Then I could click on another, send the next one over, and so forth. This is just a little bit faster. So I click on that, and all those fields are now sent over as selection fields for me to see in my click-on. I'm going to order them a little bit. So I think the ones that are related to the crash, I'd like to move up a bit. And so I'm going to move these guys up. Oh, can't go any higher. I'm going to grab these guys and get them down a little bit. Okay, that gets most of our, oops, one more, most of our stuff down there a little ways. And I want my activity ID to stay right up at the top. All right. So this is now my list of fields that I would see in my click-on. I'd like to name them a little bit more cleanly in some cases. So some of them work just fine. Some of them I'd like to spell out a little bit. So crash severity, I don't want to take up as much space on there, so I'm just going to call it severity. This is just the title of the column or the title of that field when I look at it in the click-on. Same thing with manner of crash. I'm just going to say manner. Let's get these 2 together. So that's age 1 and 2, and we'll get these guys together. Okay, contributing factor 1 and 2. We want a distance and direction from intersection to be up higher as well. Okay, and let's do this. Let's do direction and distance. These don't matter a whole lot when I'm looking at a click-on. You'll see there's plenty of space, but if you're doing a tabular report, you'll have this exact same interface, and it's handy to be able to make the columns narrower to just fit the data instead of the whole title of the field. All right, at this point, I'm going to click Save and Return, and what that lets me do is save all of those into a report, now right into a field list, and this field list is currently called Untitled. I'm going to just rename this, and for those of you that have been used to clicking up here and through a whole bunch of buttons, you'll see this process got a lot simpler. And I'm just going to call this Basic and rename, and we're done. And now it's called Basic, and you can reuse that anytime you want. You don't ever have to build that again. And so I'm going to click on OK. after choosing basic. And this list here will now contain different content. Okay, so I got my activity ID, add intersection. You can see that my direction and distance have now been shortened, severity has been shortened, manner has been shortened, and so forth. These stayed exactly the way they were. I didn't change their names. And so those are values that went into generating that particular crash graphic. And I can click on any of these guys. Oh, I was actually looking front to rear. Yeah, this was interesting. So I noticed this one when I was first clicking on it. You'll notice these two vehicles are headed towards each other, but right in the middle there's a little line. That line indicates that we have a rear-end collision, which is sort of odd for two vehicles heading in opposite directions. I would flag this crash as having bad data, as having an invalid data in one of its fields. What you see from the data is it was flagged as a front to rear. There's your rear-end collision. That's why we have that symbol. And yet we had one vehicle turning west and one vehicle going east. So not sure why that is, why that was entered in the data that way, but that's worth noting so that you can go back. If you see something like this, that's an unlikely effect, that's an unlikely occurrence, is to have a rear-end collision with vehicles traveling in opposite directions. Let's click on another crash. Let's grab this one here. And you'll notice this one, the lighting is dark and lighted. And that's what this symbol here indicates, is that we had a crash at nighttime. That's a headlight symbol that's been added to that crash. I think we have severity. We do have severity. So this one was a not injured. I'm now clicking on one that does have an injury of some sort, and this one is possible injury. In your system, you get to decide based on the values you have for severity when you want to show the symbol. Do you show it for possible? Do you show it for incapacitating, non-incapacitating, etc.? And you can decide when you want to show those. And that's all configurable in the program. Something we can help you with or something you can do yourself. All right, so that's the click-on for the collision diagrams and means of selecting different fields. And again, once I've created my click-on, it's available for later as well. So I can go back to the original click-on I was using, or I can switch back to the basic one that I just created as well. Okay. Next thing you see is we have labels on here. And these labels right now contain the year and a dash and then a case number attached to it. They're kind of long. I'm not going to go into the detail. One of the things I could do is just select a portion of it, this 1 through 6, and I could tell it to discard the first 5 characters. And that's something that that if you want to do, I can certainly show you how to do that. But for today, what I'm going to do is I just want to get rid of these square brackets. They're taking up some space, and make it a little bit cleaner. The square brackets indicate that there is no label set for this diagram. There's been no label requested, and as a result, we put the square brackets and put the basic case ID number in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go change the label. Remember, most of the settings that you do to any report are done in the Settings tab. So I'm going over to the Settings tab, and you'll notice there is no label content. Okay, and I could just type this in if I knew exactly what label content I wanted, what the field name was, but I don't. And so I'm going to click on this button, which brings up a box that lets me have a list of all my fields. And there's a lot of options here. You can have calculated fields that we've created. You can have some functions, or, and this is the important one you want to remember to go to, query fields LU is your query fields. These are the fields that you have in your database, just like these are, query fields and query fields LU. LU simply means that it's the English version. They're looked up as opposed to the numeric version. So if you put in, if you chose query fields and you chose weather, you'd get a 3 or a 4 or a 5. If you chose query fields LU, you'll get, for weather, clear, snowy, etc. What I'm going to choose is the activity ID, because as I said, I believe that's their database record. Let me see if they've actually also got a crash ID of some sort, or a case ID. No, that's probably it. Let's grab the activity ID and I'm going to insert that. And so activity ID is now what I'm going to show as a label. And you'll notice if I had known the name of the activity ID field, I would have just typed it in there. Something else I'm going to do that I find helpful is I'm going to change the color of the label. Those of you who've watched these presentations before know that I like putting a blue shade for the label color. It helps isolate it from the crash graphics. It makes it easier to see the crash graphics because the crash graphics don't contain any blue like this in them. I'm also going to make them a little bit smaller. And so now that's how I set up my label. A little bit smaller, blue, and it has the activity ID, and we should lose those square braces. I'll bring back the diagram. Okay, and the activity ID appears to be a different number than the case ID. So the case ID was a field that is also in their database that looks like the one they probably use. Activity ID, I believe, as I'm recalling now, may be the one that's used internally in the database by the city. We do support having multiple case IDs. We always pick one as the primary one that you use, and that's referred to as case ID in our system, but you can have crash IDs and other IDs, incident IDs. And the reason you'd have those typically is if you're getting your data, for example, from a state agency where they assign a number to it, and your local agency has a number that it's assigned to it, you can pick which one of those you want to have displayed. We will generally choose the more general, wider used one, which would be in that case the state ID. Okay, so this actually cleaned up our issue with the overlapping labels that I was looking at before. They were a little crowded. By making them smaller and having to pick a shorter name, they don't overlap. But I'll show you how to take care of those if they did overlap anyway. It's a question over here I want to take a quick look at. Chris Ney, you've asked, are the locations and directions of the data points roughly correct spatially? Data points, I'm guessing you're talking about the crash graphics. I'm going to describe in just a moment how the crashes are placed on the diagram. Right now I'm looking at the individual crashes, and I'm going to drag them around a little bit, show you how you can edit it, but then I'll show you how they were placed in the first case, in the first place. They're placed in a schematic manner, I will say that. So we don't actually know where this crash happened, but we do know that there were two opposing vehicles and one of them was turning left, so it's unlikely that that crash happened here or that it happened here. It's more likely it happened in the intersection. And that's the same for all of these. So you have rear end collisions, if they were north of the intersection, will generally be here, not over here, not down in the intersection. So I'll give you the details on that in just a moment. So let's say, though, that we do have some labels. Let's see if we've got any left here that are overlapping. Here's one that's overlapping. This isn't a problem if all you're doing is looking at the diagram, searching for patterns, and you're looking at it yourself. But as soon as you bring this to someone else to present it to them, and you print it out or you give them a PDF of this, it would be nice not to have that overlap occurring. The way to take care of that is to drag the crash graphics. So during this whole time that I've been clicking and getting this data, we've had this tool selected, the Click on Information tool. I'm now going to choose the Move tool, and now it's the selected tool. And that allows me to mouse over a graphic. You'll see that it changes color just like it did to do the click on. Only now if I click down and grab it and drag it, I can move it out of the way. And so I can move any of these crash graphics to where they are, where I believe they belong appropriately. So again, if you're actually doing something like giving a presentation and you want to show that the problem that's occurring in this corner had to do with perhaps a branch or a tree that was overgrown on the corner, and you want to show that all these collisions are happening here, and you want to group all the ones that happened as a result of that, maybe not this one, but all of these happened as a result. You want to put them all in one spot. You can also use it for that purpose rather than just worrying about overlapping. And I can bring this guy in and say that was the same thing. We have identified and not yet repaired a bug in the program. After you've made these changes, before you print, it's a good idea to make sure that these all stuck, that all the changes stuck. It turns out that right now if I jump straight to print, the printout may not have these where I just moved them to. We're working on that. But the way to save it explicitly and to save any report explicitly is to click on, well, to click on anything, frankly, outside of the report. But if you just click on the name of the report right next to it, that will essentially refresh and save simultaneously. And now your printout will show just like I've created. So that's dragging crash graphics. And that's the Move tool. Another option you have is to be able to rotate. And Tanya, you gave me a list of where people were from: Plano, Lake Forest, Nebraska, St. Louis County, and California. Okay, we do have some agencies that have crash graphics where the officer can code the crashes to non-cardinal directions: northeast, southeast, southwest, northeast, and that agency renders their diagrams that way. They put roads coming from the northeast as a result of that. For most agencies, that's not accurate information. It's not accurate enough, and it's not consistent enough. So what we do is we funnel them all to north, south, east, and west in order to generate the diagram. However, in those cases where you may want to show a crash on an angle like that, we do have the rotate tool as well. So that's the third tool down, and I can grab a crash graphic and rotate it to show exactly what I wanted to show. And it rotates it in 45-degree increments. So that allows me to modify that a little bit more to make it a little bit more custom if that's useful. Lastly, done specifically for the state of Nebraska, though others have now picked up and wanting to use it, is I have the rename label tool. So you just saw a moment ago, I set all these labels to case ID. And it may be that that's fine, that all I wanted to do was have a particular field get reflected in each of the crashes. It's certainly the easiest and most convenient to do. But one of your other options is to actually change the label for only one graphic. So in this case, I might want to say, this crash is the specified one. Let's take out some of that text that doesn't get ridiculously long. The specified one. So what happens now is we re-render the diagram, and now it has that particular text on it. Okay, that crash is now, no matter what I set the labels to, if I say, hey, put weather on each one of these, this one's still going to say the specified one. Okay, so let me show you how to undo that, and I'm also going to show you how crashes are placed on the diagram. So I'm going to go back to diagram settings. And one thing I can do is reset crash customizations. This is going to place the crashes back in their original positions, and it's going to remove that label change that we just did. So I say OK to that. And all my crashes that I moved are now back where they belonged. So these are now aligned where they were. These are aligned where they were. And this guy's label now has the activity ID on it again. So the second thing, and this is to go and answer Chris's question, how do we place the crashes? I'm going to click on an option here called Show Areas, something you generally don't need to do. This is more of an informational piece of information. All right, this is the same diagram, and it's showing what are called the areas for the schematic. Each of these areas specifies a condition under which a crash will be placed into that area. So there are 7 areas on the approaches, and then there are 4 areas for angle crashes, and then 2 areas for the various head-on left turn collisions. These are for opposing direction crashes. It says northbound, southbound. This one has eastbound, westbound. These are your southbound, westbound, northbound, westbound, northbound, eastbound, and so forth. The approaches are a little bit different, and these are overlapping, so there's a little bit of extra text there. What we're getting here in this area, the very first area, is northbound, northbound, and south of the intersection. In this area, we're getting northbound, northbound, south of the intersection, and at least 50 feet from the intersection are these crashes. The last section here does not actually have to be northbound, northbound. What this requires is that they be south of the intersection, and we've determined that they are on this side of the intersection. I'd have to look at the exact code for that, but this area, and this area are based primarily on being south of the intersection, but not being northbound, northbound. So you might have a crash here. If you get this crash and we told it that it was 50 feet south of the intersection, or it was 10 feet south of the intersection, we're going to put it down in this area. If you've used the program for a very long time, we never had that. It was entirely possible that you'd get crashes in here that were south of the intersection simply because they were angle crashes and therefore must have been in the intersection. That is not always the case, and as a result, you'll see those angle crashes occurring outside. Here are your opposite direction crashes, northbound, southbound, and eastbound, westbound, that occurred south of the intersection, appearing here. I'm going to go turn that off, and we'll be able to take another look at those crashes. Now, it's worth noting that schematics are built. This is your angle crashes, your north-southbound, and angle crashes, again, that were indicated to be south of the intersection. I think we've got the data for that here. So this is 500 feet south of the intersection, but nonetheless associated with the intersection, street and cross street, and that's all. So let's jump to the question that had to do with how you avoid having crashes that are not in the intersection if you're looking for just intersection crashes. This is where filters come in. Let me actually stop for just a moment. Do we have questions related to what we've covered in the diagram, editing the diagram, clicking, etc.? Okay, one question we just had from Chris in California is, anything we do on the diagram report, labels, etc., do they affect the database? The answer is absolutely no. I'll take it a step further and say they also don't affect anything anybody else would ever see in their system, in their account. Everybody who logs in is in an isolated sandbox of a sort, so they don't actually see what you have unless it's explicitly shared with them, which is doable. But no, anything you do here does not change the data and is not spread to anybody else. When you are going to edit data, you will know it. And most of you who are importing data from another source don't actually even have an edit capability, don't have the ability to change data. You'll know that again in the main screen. You'll see a data entry icon if you have that ability. That's the only time that you can actually change the internal content of the data. Which is generally good. It may be inconvenient sometimes if you wanted to jump in there and say, I want to drag this crash right into the intersection. I'd love for it to say distance is now 0. That does not happen. So this is just the diagram itself. Okay, other questions before we move along? I'm going to touch on filters briefly. Okay, so I'm going to click on the filter box because that's how I limit the crashes that I see in the diagram. I've already made the selection by doing Custer Road and West Parker for this time period. Now I can limit the data. I can't add to that data using the filter, but using the filter I can limit the data. So in here I was actually hoping we'd see already a filter for add intersection, but I don't see one. So I'm going to end up creating my own. What you're seeing here is filters that we've provided or that are shared with your group, as well as filters that are just mine. They're in my account. By the way, you can note over here in the top right, that's me being logged in. So anytime you're running, if you want to make sure it is you logged in or you want to know whose account you're working in, if you're making changes here, that's indicating to you who's logged in. And again, everybody who's logged in will have a different list of studies and reports. You may have different click-ons and so forth, depending on how your system's set up. And again, any of those things can be shared with other people in your system, at your agency. All right. If you've seen this dialog box before, this is now different. There's a small difference, but it's an important one, and I believe it'll make life a lot easier for people. So in the past, the way filters worked is you could pick a single filter. So I would choose serious severity. Excuse me. I would choose serious severity. And what serious severity looks like is I've created a filter that says crash severity is killed, or non-incapacitating, or possible, or incapacitating. Those are the crashes that I want to see. So I would say okay, and I get my severity. And now all of these will have circles on them, indicating some sort of injury or a fatality. Okay? Now in the past, if I wanted to add to that they have to be at the intersection, like this guy here shouldn't be there and this guy here shouldn't be there, what I would have to do is I would have to edit this filter and I'd add to the expression and distance less than this, or and at intersection. Major change to the program that just occurred will ship again this week. It will ship either this afternoon or tomorrow, provided everything goes well in the next 2 trainings. We'll know that. But what this allows me to do is create a new filter, and I'm going to do that right now. So we'll create a new filter, and I've now got a new untitled filter, and I'm going to edit it. Now I want you to note that that this checkbox tells me that I've selected serious severity. That's the filter that's going to apply. If I click OK, that's what's going to show up on the screen. But what's blue is what I'm going to operate on. I'm going to actually make changes to, edit, rename, duplicate, etc. So I'm selecting that so I can edit it. And I believe we had a field called add intersection. There's add intersection. Yes. And now I have a filter that specifies that a crash needs to be at the intersection. Now, a little bit of a disclaimer, I don't know what's in this database. I don't know if add intersection is set the way we expect that it is. We'll find that out in a moment. I'm going to save that, and I'm also going to give it a name because untitled doesn't help me much. I'm going to call this add intersection, rename it, and here's what's cool and new. I can check both add intersection and serious severity, and it combines the 2 filters for me and makes them both active at the same time. So the filters are still independent. I didn't have to go typing new filters, and if I wanted to do, for example, serious severity and red light running, I can do that without typing any new filters in. Okay, so I'm going to choose add intersection and serious severity and see if we lose this one, and we'll see if any others disappear. Okay, we lost a lot of the rear ends. They were all flagged as not necessarily at intersection. You'll notice that my severity is misspelled. At intersection and serious severity are my current filters that are active, and these are the crashes that fit those. I want to go verify that. I'm confident it's right, but I want you to see that as well. I'm going to go back into my filter, and I'm going to do 2 things. First, I'm going to rename my serious severity. Okay, I'm now going to take a look at that I'm going to turn off add intersection. I'm just going to grab serious severity. So serious severity is the only one checked. And I'm just going to take a look at some of these. So if I click on this guy right here that disappeared. Did we not include add intersection? Oh, we had a different one. It was basic. I knew I set it up for it. Okay. Add intersection has no value there. So it's not true. It's just not false. So that field can't be used by checking for add intersection is true in order to show the crashes. Let's try some of these others. We may have to use that field a little bit differently. So this one is yes. So add intersection turns out to be null and not populated in some cases, and you have to decide in this case whether that's the field you want to use because it looks like it's not going to be consistent. Some of them could be at the intersection and blank, or they could be away from the intersection and therefore blank. I'm going to pick a different field as a result of that. I'm going to use the distance field because that sure as heck means that we're not at the intersection. So there's a couple of ways to use the distance field, and let's go grab that. So I'm going to go to the filter. I'm going to create a new filter. Rather than using add intersection, I'll use distance. So I'll choose untitled. After I create my new, it's an untitled one. I'm going to click on edit. And I probably have a couple of options here. There's probably a distance from intersection field right in this database, but I'll let you know that for some people's databases, let's see, distance from intersection. Some people's databases, you will find you also have a field called units, distance units. And that means that your distance field may contain miles or it may contain feet. And if that's the case, you have some work to do. You have to make sure you do calculations based on the units before you do the comparison to the distance you want to use. Well, For this agency, this is pretty easy. They've got distance from intersection. I don't think we're going to have any lookups because there's no set values. I'm going to add distance from intersection, and it says equal to. I don't want equal to. I want greater than or less than. So I want my distance to be less than, let's say 150 feet. Okay, let me just, a few things I just did there. Number one, I just changed .eq dot to a less than sign. These are one way of specifying my comparison operators. This is equals, not equals, less than or equals, greater than or equals to, or like. You can also use these symbols for the same thing. Equals, less than or equals, greater than equals, not equals. Okay, those are all valid operators as well for this. So I happen to prefer to use these, so I just put this less than in there. Second thing is I chose 150. And the last thing, as I mentioned, is I chose the users field, the database field, distance from intersection. I'm going to show you another option. And for this client, these values will be identical. For many of you, however, these values will not be identical. PD programming, in order to set up your configuration for CrashMagick, prepares a bunch of what are called calculated fields. These are fields that we sort of need to know the answer to in order to have the program work properly. And since everybody has different values in their database and different ways of coding things, we have to normalize them a little bit. We never change your data. The data you have in your query fields will always be exactly what you have in your database. But we need some other information. So one of the things we do is we have our own dist from int field. It looks like this. And if I say that is less than 150, I know I'm talking about feet. Our dist from int is already calculating, if it's necessary, that it should be in feet. So if it comes across in miles or meters or anything else, we calculate it back to feet for our dist from int. Now I do know that for Plano, I believe there are no units in there. So I'm just going to use their normal field like this. Okay. I'm just taking a quick note. Rama from the city of Plano has left a comment here. We found there are blanks in add intersection and the distance field. So we may end up wanting to use both. We'll have to see some combination of them. But I'm going to use distance from intersection here. And I'm going to name this filter again more appropriately. And I'll call it distance less than 150. Okay. So now I have multiple filters for this. I can choose distance less than 150 and the severity field as we did a moment ago. And we'll see what different crashes we get. So this included a couple of the rear end collisions that we had lost before as well. So that's the answer to, when you're looking at diagrams, how you make sure that you get the crashes that are at the intersection. There are different schools of thought on this, and so I'll let you know that those filters can be a bit more complicated if you want. I'll jump in and I'll make a quick, slightly more complicated one. Distance less than 150. Let's go edit that one. And I'm going to say or, and I'm going to do my distance again, distance from intersection, less than, oops, chose direction, not distance. Distance less than, let's add that in there. So do distance less than 250, and manner of crash is front to rear. Okay. Now what I'm hoping to be looking for, I'll need to make a little modification here, but what I'm hoping to be looking for is all the crashes that were within 150. In fact, we're going to lower this just a little bit. We'll make this one 100. So all the crashes that are within 100, or all the crashes that were within 250 and were rear ends, so perhaps in a queue somewhere. Here's a catch though. Right now, the computer might read this as distance from intersection is less than 100 or distance from intersection is less than 250, and in all cases has to be a front to rear. And that's not what I meant. Worth taking a look at our filter training. but just to give you an idea, what I have to do here is tell it to group these guys. Now I'm saying distance less than 100 or this entire statement, less than 250 and front to rear. Okay, so we'll save and return that. And so now I'm going to actually rename this one more time, and I'm going to call this near intersection. And now I want near intersection and serious severity, and we'll see if we get a different number of crashes. Okay, so I get 8. Okay. So that's the idea of filters, and you can filter on anything you have in your database, any combination of anything you have in your database, and now, as I've shown, you can also pick from ones that already exist to combine them with others rather than having to actually build a more complex filter. So I can show just the near intersection. It doesn't have to be severe. Okay, so now that I've shown you that, I want to go back. The original question was actually, so if I've got a high crash location list and I don't want to get all those crashes that are away from the intersection, that are in the corridor, how do I avoid them? Well, once you have specified a filter, once you've decided on a filter, perhaps it's near intersection. Whoops, I did not mean to click cancel. That's what happens when you're holding a teacup in one hand and trying to drive your mouse with the other. They get confused. Near intersection. So these numbers should now change. 92, 62, 60, 60, 42, 37, 46, 34. So we've just reordered all of these as well in some ways for the crashes actually occurring at the intersection. And now again, if I was to choose one of these, let's say Preston and West Park, and I said let's make another collision diagram. This diagram now has near intersection as an attribute already because this original study that created it, the high crash location list, had near intersection. So again, gave me the same time period, gave me the same filter, same category list, just zoomed in on one particular location, gave me that collision diagram. Okay, questions on filters or diagrams, or I'm going to start popping through some of the other reports rather quickly. All right, going to move forward. So, as I mentioned, these are the various types of reports we can create. We've already done a high crash location list, and we've already done a diagram, although not from there. We've done them from down here. I'm going to do one quick example of how you would create this if you already knew the location. You didn't want to go do a high crash location list. You know the location you want, and you know you want a collision diagram. All I would do is I would go to my new study. I'd go to the settings, and rather than choosing date range, I would choose intersection. I'd choose my time period, and let's say that what I wanted to do was Custer Road. I'm just starting to type and it gives me those values, and I do Parker, and I've got some options, and there's West Parker. Important to note, I've received a number of phone calls where somebody will do this. Let's see if we can do this. Nope. Nah. Occasionally you may find that you have enough street names in your database that you'll start typing a letter and you'll get a list, and it'll say at the bottom of it, first 100, or that's the last of the first 100. We only put a certain number of streets in here. To make that list shorter and therefore to get to the street you're looking for, you may need to type a few more characters. So again, I can do PAR, and I've gotten pretty close, and I can now do West Parker. Once I've done that, I'm in the same situation as I was with the date range study. I can click this button to see if I get some crashes. Yes, I do. And it shows me now that I get 58 crashes from the query. So 58 crashes were at Custer, were coded to Custer and West Parker, but only 23 of them were what we defined as near intersection. So from here, now that I've got the study, I go click on collision diagram, pick a collision diagram. Most often you're going to be using four-way intersection. We have a lot of other schematics available as well. I recommend you take a look at the collision diagrams topic-specific training that's on our site to get more details about collision diagrams. But this is how you go in when you know the location, you know the time period, and you know you want a collision diagram. You just go straight into it without any high crash location list. All right. Let's hit the other reports real quick. So one of them is the listings. Let's say we want to know what the values are for these fields. I can click on my listing report. And I have several listing reports available, or I can create new ones. I'm going to choose basic listing. And basic looks like it's more like random. Somebody has just grabbed a bunch of fields. I'm going to edit this one. Okay, so I have a basic listing for the crashes, and you can see I've got each of the case numbers for each one of them. I get the manner of collision, contributing factor, but I get a whole lot of contributing factor information, which is really not that interesting to me. I'm going to edit that, and we'll see which other ones I have options to use. I'm not really excited about any of them. I think this pin map list was actually kind of good, so I'm going to grab that, but I'm going to duplicate it rather than actually using it. So I click on duplicate and go in and edit it. So I got that selected, and I'll go edit it. So this one has, let's see, street name, house name. It's got a lot of location information in it, and then directions. That actually looks pretty good to me. I'm going to add severity to it, and let's grab crash severity. When I go to click this arrow, it's going to put the field wherever I've selected. So I'm going to jump in right here, and it's going to put it right after at intersection. So I get the crash severity in there, and maybe we'll throw in weather just so we have another categorical field in there. So now I've got some fields, and it's not going to be called pin list copy anymore. We're going to name this Pete's list. We have only certain characters allowed for all of the naming of things that you create. If I ever create a name that has an invalid character in it, it's going to get corrected for me. And in fact, if I put a totally invalid character, it'll put a little tilde in place of that character. So I tend to avoid using special syntax, less than, greater than, or stuff like that in my names, because it'll just clear that. It'll fix that for me, and I want it to be exactly how I specify it. Okay, so here is our listing for all the crashes at this location and all of the values for all the fields that I've selected in that list box. Something we won't be going into too great a detail on is the category. This is the filter here. This is the category list for the study. I'm going to change that here, give you a quick idea of what it is, but we won't go into detail on it. Clicking on category list, and I'm going to set the category list to time of day. This is one where at night it's fairly dark, gets to the daytime, gets lighter, gets darker again into the night. When I do that, all of my crashes in this listing get highlighted to match that. Okay. Incidentally, because I did this at the study level, which is how that category list works, it's up at the study level. When I go to my diagram, it's highlighted as well, same way. You can do that for any field. You can do that for severity, for manner of collision, any field that you've got. You can create a category list for it, pick the colors, and have it highlight, therefore, your diagram, your listing, and so forth. So that's the creation of a field list. You can also choose to sort your list. So let's try sorting. Actually, I'm going to sort by severity. And I'm also going to go back and I'm going to change, it's just saving it here, I'm going to change this to severity. We have created, PD Program has created a category list for you called severity, and all of you have this, that categorizes just as fatal injury or property damage. You still have your own severity field that has all the gradations of it, but this is sort of a least common denominator version of severity that lets you just break down crashes into fatal injury or PDO. So I'm going to use that one, and I'm sorting by that. So now I've got my 3 different severity levels. well, non-incapacitating injury becomes an injury. This is not injured at all. And possible must not be categorized as a injury. In this case, it must be a not injury in this configuration. But likewise, that highlighting just applied there. It also applied in here. So my injuries are all turned orange. As you can see. That's what my category lists are for. And the sorting of your listing. Okay. I'm going to clear the category list here by choosing none, no category list. Okay, so that's our tabular listing. Charts. We ship a bunch of charts with the program. You can also create charts. So the first one I'm going to do is a time of day chart. Using that same category list, I get a time of day chart. And I can pick from any of the charts that were in there that were predefined, or I can create new ones. So I'm going to jump in here and say, let's change and perhaps even create a brand new one. This is the list of all the predefined ones or ones that we've already created for the City of Plano. So I can tell you that contributing factors and total vehicles, those were ones that were created specifically for the City of Plano. I'm now going to create a new one. So I'm going to say new category list, and I want to do this for manner of collision. So I'll edit my category list. When you have a category list, this is essentially going to have all of the bins for the charts in here. The most common way to do this is to simply fill it, let the program do that as a wizard. You can add each one manually, add one bin, add another, but watch this. All I have to do is go into manner of collision or manner of crash, and it fills up all the values for manner of collision for me, sets up a condition for each one, gives each one a title, and gives each one a color. So now I've got a manner of collision category list all set and ready to go. So that's this one right here, manner of crash. There's my colors and my possible values, and I choose OK. And there's my manner of crashes for this location. If you're in Colorado, or if you're in a state where they've got a lot of possible values for manner of crash, and for that reason the chart becomes kind of cluttered with a whole lot of zeros down here, one of the things you can do to your charts, and there's a lot of stuff you can do to customize your chart, but you can say I don't want to see empty bins. If I do that, I will only show those bins that have values in them. Okay, you'll notice there were a lot of other settings. I'll just do a quick run through of them. So I can change the title, make it a whole lot bigger, turn on a legend, perhaps put marks on each one of the bars or on each one of the pie slices, change the font for the left side, change the font for the bottom, change the footer size. Go back and look at my chart. So now I got these nice green labels across the bottom. I've got tags across the top. I've changed the color of these guys. This is bigger, and I've given myself a legend. A lot of options in there. The design of this box should allow you to be able to see what you're going to be editing. You'll notice it says footer. When I'm on the footer tab, you can see where the footer is. The bottom axis is in cyan. You can see which pieces you're about to edit as you walk through them over here. Okay, that's charts. Crosstabs are like two charts. It's two category lists compared against each other. And so if I grab crosstabs, I'm given some options of ones that already exist, and I'll just choose here time of day versus severity. Sometimes to generate new charts you have to create, or new reports, you create a sort of basic one first and then you can go edit it and save it if you want. So this is time of day versus severity, and it's the counts for each one of those up to the 23 that are at this location. But maybe I don't want severity. Maybe what I really wanted was manner of collision up there. I can edit this just as I said, at the bottom to the right of all this stuff will always be specific to the report you're working on. So I'm going to say I'd like to create a new category set, and I'm going to go edit it. What should I put in my new category set? My rows I'm going to keep as time of day. That worked for me. My columns I was going to make manner of crash. I'll save that. And now I have a new time of day versus manner of crash category set. And that's the one I'm now using. Same number of crashes, but now they're categorized somewhat differently. And I still have the same option as I had with charts to not show empty. Well, for time of day, down the left side, I would want to always show the empties because it gives you context for each of the hours. So I'm going to show empty rows, but I don't want to show empty columns because the empty columns are the manners of collision. I don't need to see the ones that didn't exist. So now I just have front to rear, front to front, angle, and other, and my total. Tanya has just asked that I show exporting that, and I don't know that I can. Tanya, tell me about exporting this. Oh, Tanya ran away. Anytime you're looking at any study, any group of data, so it's these 23 crashes, you can export that entire data set. So I can choose here to export. Remember I said these first groups right here were all specific to the study you're in. So I can export crash records from the current study. I need to pick a listing, right? Let's grab Pete's list. And I can pick whether I want that to go out as a comma file, XML file, or one of a couple of Excel files. So I just chose download as Excel, and I can open that, and all the data that went into producing this report, that field list, is now dumped off to Excel. So you get all the fields. Some of our reports are capable of being exported as a report. This particular example I just did was for the study, not for this report, so I just exported the study. If, for example, I was in a high crash location list, let's go grab that one real quick. When we were looking at the high crash location list, you notice that not only does it have an export for the study, it's also got an export of the list. And in this case, when I do that, I'm exporting the actual list of intersections and counts. So that's the actual report. Collision diagrams are capable of that as well. They can be exported as a graphic rather than just seeing them on the screen or printing them as a PDF. You can download them as a DGN or as a DXF or stuff like that for editing elsewhere. That cover it for you, Tanya? It's where everybody's mute today. Okay, so we did our category, we did our crosstabs. I'm actually going to pass on layouts today. Layouts are what we use when we print, and so I'm just going to show you what a normal print would look like. Let's say I had manner of crash here, and I choose to print. That's the print icon right here. The output type is always PDF, and so the program fires up a PDF engine in the back and renders that chart into the PDF. Now in this case, we're only going to have one chart in that PDF, one report. The program is capable of putting multiple charts, diagrams, etc. into the PDF. Oh, popped up on another screen. So this is our printout of the chart we were just looking at. Can I zoom out a bit? There we go. So that's the printout. What layouts let you do is say, yeah, I'd like a collision diagram next to that chart or below that chart, or I want a listing next to it, and so forth. We do have a recorded training on that you can watch, and we will be doing more of those in the future. Let me see if there's actually any that we created specifically for Plano already. It's possible we have one of those. Nope, I do not, so I don't have one to show you there. After this training, I'm going to finish in just a couple minutes and start taking questions. If someone's particularly interested in layouts, I can cover that afterwards. Lastly, this is a new button that is not in our training training guide. It is not anywhere that you have seen before. And it is our pin maps. It is our first version of pin maps that we're putting out officially. And it basically allows you, I'm clicking on it now, allows you to create a pin map for the location. Click on pin map here for the location that we're at right here. So Custer and Parker, and there are all the crashes based on the lat long coordinates. And we're using ArcGIS server for this, ArcGIS Online if you don't have an ArcGIS server. Once the crash is up, you can click on it. And so this is data for that crash. In this case, it looks like I got some gibberish up here. I've got some stuff I wouldn't normally put in a click on. So what I'm going to do is go back to my map settings, and I'm going to choose a different one. How about click on for pin map? And that will determine which fields will be shown when I click on the crash. So that's a little cleaner. We've got our streets, we've got our address, distance and direction from the intersection, and so forth. And if you have more than one crash at that location, you can walk through each of those crashes. For example, here there's probably a whole bunch, 12 of them. And I can walk through each one of those. You can put whatever fields you like in here. Actually working on it so that we can put links in there as well, and images. Haven't quite got those down, but in theory they should all work as well. So you can do that for any location.
So Pete, Rama asked if it emits the records that don't have the lat long data.
No, but now it lets you know that. Up until today, anybody who's been using our beta maps will get, up until today, you would just see the map and it wouldn't tell you that that had occurred. Now it will tell you if it's missing any of them. It will say to you, there were 8 crashes in this study and only 6 are displayed on the map. That's brand new starting today with this version. So the version that's out unhosted doesn't yet do that. Again, we'll do that this week once it's updated. We'll show you that. So the crashes remain part of this study. So you may, for example, go to your diagram and see 12 crashes and go to your pin map and it'll tell you 4 of them weren't displayed, and so you've only got 8 in your pin map. We're working on some other solutions for that, and we're also hopefully very shortly going to have the map itself print that so that it's not possible to print the map without having that information next to it. We want to make sure people know that they don't have all the crashes. So question here from Chris, which is the plotting of mid-block collisions are correct. That's a question. I will make that a statement, which is yes, the crashes are placed where the lat long coordinates are specified in the data. We are not determining the location of the crash from your offsets or from anything else. We're using the lat long data that's in your database. Now, this is important to understand. Some of you have lat long coordinates in your data, some of you don't. Some of you have lat long coordinates that are not good. I'm going to just go out on a limb here and say California Switter's lat long coordinates, not so good. As a result of finding a lot of people that either don't have coordinates or have bad coordinates or a lot of missing coordinates, PD Programming has created a program that will locate your crashes based on distance and direction from the intersection and place and give them lat long coordinates that are accurate. We're still testing to see how good we are compared to existing data, but from everything we've seen, we are at least as good as anybody's that's out there. So anybody who's got, we've been comparing a lot with people who already geocode their crashes. We're geocoding, putting the numbers right next to them, looking at the differences between them, looking at the hard copies. We consistently are at least as good, generally better, sometimes much better, about placing the crashes. If you're interested in having your data re-geocoded, let us know right now. Since we're still in testing phase, we'll just do that for you as a little test. We eventually probably will begin charging for the geocoding feature to be able to geocode the crashes. But to answer your question, whatever you've got in your data for lat long is what we're placing here. Okay. Also, I should add, because Rama just asked this question about entering lat longs, if you have data entry in your program, you can go in and put in the lat longs. you may have to ask us to add lat long to your fields in data entry if you don't have them. But if you have data entry and you have lat longs as available data entry fields, you can just correct those in your data entry, come right back, and the crashes will appear. If you're in a situation, as Rama is, where her police department's entering the data and putting those crash records in, you'd need to go back, have that data corrected, and the way everybody's that we know of systems are set up, they will resend that data to CrashMagic. It will overwrite the old record that we've got. You'll have new data in the system with the crash coordinates, and the lat long data will appear and your crash will appear. So you can correct your data on your system, and then it will get resent because that's how your system is set up, Rama. I know that for yours for certain, and pretty much everybody else's is designed so that new crash records or corrected crash records will be updated in our system. Okay. Let me see if there's anything else that I wanted to touch on here. Take a look again at who we have and whether there's data entry or whether there's importing going on. So Plano, you don't have to worry about importing. Lake Forest, you will do some importing. Nebraska, there's no importing. That's all automated. St. Louis County, you know how to do importing. And Stantec, you know how to do importing. We need to help you with creating new user groups. So I'm not going to go over importing here. I know I'm going to be doing a training with Lake Forest in a few weeks, and so we'll cover that then. Study queries. Tanya, help me. I'm not clear what you mean by that. Okay, good. Thank you. So we have in the program, first of all, we have many different clients, right? We have clients that are state DOTs. We have clients in California that are cities and counties in Arizona and so forth. While you all have similar needs and similar types of data, hate to tell you, it's all different. Although I guess that's my job, security, is making a program that can handle all those different types. Well, as a result, what you'll find is when you go to create a study, say new study, or you click on a study to edit a study, this form I showed you already has different values depending on which type of study you choose. And what we talked about before was the date range and the intersection type studies. You'll notice there are other type studies here. Those are going to be specific to each client. Again, they will all be similar. They'll be like each other in that they'll take the same type of data, but they will be really specific for you and keying on certain fields in your database. So let me give you an example. XY rectangle is allowing you to put in the coordinates that you want in your diagram. That's a little laborious, right? You're going to actually look up the coordinates that you want. We have a plugin that works in ArcMap, and if you have ArcMap on your desktop and you've got our plugin, which is free, installed there, when you draw a rectangle over an intersection or over a corridor, you can send all of those crashes to CrashMagic based on their coordinates. You can basically send those coordinates to CrashMagic. And that's what this is for. That'll auto-populate this, and you'll have a collision, you'll have a study that was based on the lat long coordinates. So that's what XY rectangle is. Now some people's is called XY rectangle, some are lat long. Most people have some version of that. If you don't have coordinate data in your database, you will not even see this. You will not have any type of a lat long type study. Case ID. This is an older configuration. Rama, if you would, please remind me by sending me an email after the session. Most of you will have, instead of case ID, you'll have something called case ID list. And what this case ID does is I can type in a specific case ID number and say that's the one I want to look for. Those of you that have case ID lists will actually have a box right here. And you can punch in as many case IDs as you want. If you just want one, you can just put one in, but you can put 20 in. And that's a really useful feature. It also has another box over here that allows you to combine studies. So if I have this study and this study, and let's say that Central Expressway is actually the same as West Spring Creek Parkway, well, then you'd want to combine this one and this one so that you can get, if that intersection basically has 3 streets coming into it with different names, you can combine those. It'll become a case ID list, and you can diagram or do studies on them. So that's another type of study, is a case ID list study. For those of you that have case ID, and there will be a few of you that have somewhat older configurations before we created case ID lists, it's the same idea except it's just one crash ID. It's for when you're trying to figure out something about one crash. Very few of you will have address. I think I can name them on one hand the number of people that are using address data in the program, but if you've got good addresses for your data, absolutely worth having. This allows you to specify a street name and an address range. So, Chris, before you start typing, California does not have good enough address data for you to use this as a reliable means of querying your data. I'm going to go with anybody who has address data that you are entering, it's good. Your agency's entering it, it's good. If your state's entering it, don't count on it. I don't think I know any states that enter address data that put good data in for the address fields. So this is useful. You can say go from the 300 block to the 800 block of Custer Road, and you'll get all of those crashes. Okay. I'm going to recommend not clicking on the export tab here. If any of you are playing around, I'm going to have that removed. It's a special feature for just a few clients. We'll someday document it and then make it public, but right now it's very specific. I would describe it as beta right now. Just a couple of people testing it out for us. Okay, other questions? One thing we didn't touch on here is schematics. So every collision diagram is built using a schematic. I showed you the areas for the schematic a moment ago, but we have many different schematics that have different types of areas. Here's a list of the schematics. I was clicking on this button down here. And so we have a number of schematics like approaches from different directions. This is where we ignore all the crashes on the legs of the intersection except for one leg. Corridors really only work with route milepost right now, and so I'm not going to go into them. These are four-leg intersections that have turn lanes, or in fact, let's take a look at one of those. So here's turn lanes coming from the south, or southbound coming from the north. So this is a four-leg intersection with one turn lane coming from the north. Now, we don't place the crashes based on the lanes. That data is not in your database. If that data is in your database, please let us know. If that's reliable, we'll take a look at that and we'll see if we can't work them into the schematics. But what you can do is use the move tool now to move the crashes based on your reading of the reports to say where they actually occurred. And that would give you a better depiction of the diagram because someone who's not familiar with that location can now know that there is indeed a turn lane there and not here or here or here. So that's what schematics are for. And as I said, there's quite a number of them in there. So we're looking here at this four-leg intersection. We can also do a T intersection. Here's a T with one turn lane on the north side. I'm sorry, the T facing north and has one turn lane in it. Wouldn't want a turn lane over here. Now, one of the things you'll notice is sometimes if you choose a schematic that is not appropriate to the intersection, you might get a message like this. 2 crashes could not be placed in this schematic. And what's happening there is there are actually 2 crashes that are northbound vehicles, 2 northbound vehicles, and we don't know where to put them because 2 northbound vehicles do not belong in this diagram, so they end up here. Generally, when you get this message, it's because you've chosen an inappropriate schematic. It's possible that you're getting it because the data in your crashes is not complete. You're missing the directions of travel, for example, for those crashes. So how do you find out what's going on there? Well, one thing you can do, you'll notice that it says 2 crashes couldn't be placed, and then I've got a legend down underneath it. Well, if I get rid of that legend, you'll see that we're actually hiding the crashes under there. So I can go to my settings for my diagram, turn off that legend, and come back to the diagram. And what will happen is the crashes will appear down there, down where that text used to be. And now I can click on one of those crashes and I can see, I can already tell by looking at it that I have northbound crashes here. I got 2 northbound vehicles, and that's how come it's not plottable in this schematic. In the event that you don't have directions for your vehicles, we'll actually put in a fake vehicle. We'll put in just a symbol that you can click on so that you can click on it and get the data so that you can know why that crash isn't showing up. And at that point, edit your data and your crash will then be correct. And again, editing data may be you editing it directly using our data entry or editing it on your own system and re-importing that data. Questions? Anything else I missed in there? Didn't do copy and paste, but let's just use a small example here. Let's say that I did Coit and West Spring Parkway, and I did a collision diagram, and it has 43 crashes, and I want to filter, but I don't want to lose this one. I still want to be able to see this report with that collision diagram in it. I can select copy while I've selected the study, and note that I've selected the study. If I just copied the collision diagram, all I'd ever paste back in is a collision diagram template into somewhere else. But if I copy the study, and you'll see now what's on the clipboard is Coit Road and West Spring Parkway, I now have a paste. And if I select paste, I'll get Coit Road and West Spring Parkway 1 and a collision diagram in it. And now I can take that one and I can play with the filter. So I can say, let's just get the ones that are at intersection for this one. Or actually, better yet, let's just choose those red light running ones. So now this study only has 7 in it, but now I get to have 2 collision diagrams. So this is one that are the red light running ones, and here's the exact same study, but with no filter on it that will show all the crashes. Okay, other questions? Got about 15-20 more minutes, and prefer to take some questions if anybody's feeling a little lost or wanted a particular topic covered. But if not, I'm going to jump in and do a couple of layouts and then close down the training. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm going to do a couple layouts. So layouts are the one report type that I didn't touch on today. And what a layout allows us to do is create a template for a PDF to be generated that uses multiple reports, one or more reports. So I'm going to choose layout. It's occurring to me that when we prepared this beta test for this version, I spent a lot of time testing a lot of the functionality, but did not test layouts. So let's hope we didn't mess up layouts in this latest version. So I'm choosing the default layout. A default layout is just a single, just like we printed before. When we printed, we just had one area that you could put a report in. And that's the default report. That's a default template. I'm going to choose a different kind of template. So I've got a bunch of templates in here. And I will choose a letter size page, and we'll choose landscape 1x2. And what this will do, it'll give me a landscape piece of paper. It'll give me one place I can put a graphic, one report in the first column, and it'll give me 2 reports in the second column. And each of these areas is named. So if I choose sub 2, it highlights the other one. If I choose main, it highlights the big one. Title and subtitle and left info and right info are the text that sit up here. And generally our defaults should work fine for you. Certainly for today, they're good enough. So we put in defaults that put in the name of the study and the filter name and the number of crashes, and that's all built in. But you do have to fill in something for the areas in the report. So I'm going to choose main, and because it's nice portrait mode, I'm going to throw a diagram in there. So I'm going to click on change the content, and again, because this is beyond the scope of this training, I'm going to move a little bit quickly. We do have a layout specific training that'll take you through these steps. So I'm just going to kind of move through this kind of quickly. I'm going to choose a collision diagram, ask for the diagram template, and that's what will now go in here is this diagram. Now I want to do this area, sub 1, and I want to put a chart in there. Whoops. And so I'm going to put in the time of day chart. And in the lower area, sub 2, I think I'm going to put another chart in. Let's do the severity chart that we created. I could be putting anything. I could be listings in there. I can put other diagrams, collision diagrams in there, charts. Any of the reports can go in there. Okay, and then I go take a look at my report. And so now that's a report that contains all of those things. Here's what I like about this report. So I've now created a report based on a template that's got a diagram, it's got these 2 charts, everything's just the way I want it. I'm going to create a template for this. I'm going to call this Pete's Useful Report. Create a new template called Pete's Useful Report. That now exists up here. So I'm going to go click on another location. Here we were playing with Preston and West Park. We had whatever, 92 crashes, 32 after filtering. I'm going to click on this for a layout. And instead of just having my default, I've also got Pete's Useful Report. This is now Preston and West Park, and those same 3 reports combined into one. Same report, different data. Okay, I'm going to show you one other thing that is just informational, really. When I click, it's interesting. This is why it's beta. I'm waiting for something to pop up that's not popping up. There it is. So you'll notice that when you're looking at any of these boxes, when you're choosing filters, field lists, reports, etc., there'll be 3 different icons to the left of the name of every one of the ones you can pick. In this case, it's filters. And those 3 icons are as follows. There's a padlock, and it says this filter is owned by master config. You can't edit resources in that location. You're not authorized. Nobody is, frankly. We can't edit them. We have to replace them at shipping time. So these are ones that we create in the program, PD Programming does, and you have access to them to use them, but you can't edit them. Then you have ones that have a key on them, and it says this is owned by Plano Shared, of which you're an administrator. So I am an administrator of Plano Shared, and as a result, I can edit this one. So if I click on here, I'm allowed to edit it, rename it, duplicate it, or delete it. This one is like that as well. This is also one that is in Plano Shared. So anybody who's an administrator of Plano gets that key, and that's why they can edit it. Personal are your own, and this says this is your personal or private filter. You can use this. Nobody else even sees it until it's shared to the rest of the group, and right now it's not. So that allows you to edit this one as well. You'll notice, by the way, for the ones that you can't edit, you have no permissions to, you can still duplicate it. And if you click on duplicate, you get a copy of that in your own personal area, and that allows you to work on something like it. You can rename it and make one just like it for yourself and then tweak it. So you can always use the ones that you have no access to change by making a duplicate and then editing that. All right, questions on layouts or on that piece of the selection box? Oh, this is kind of a cool one, actually. Just because we don't have a filter one to show you. Notice I told you you could checkbox all of these. I can checkbox more than one at a time, and it just builds this huge old massive filter. Filters can be referenced by their names, and as a result, one of the things I can do is combine my checked filters into one big filter that I can just select one of instead of having to remember to check all 4 each time. I can combine these. It says it combined the 4 checked filters into one called combined. And this is what combined looks like. Combined just says red light and add intersection and near intersection and serious severity. And that's all that's needed in there because those filters already exist, and so it makes use of those already existing filters to build this combined filter. We could clear those, just select combined, and that's the extent of the filter, is that it uses those other filters. All right. I'm going to wait a few moments for questions, and then this training will be over. Thank you all for coming and attending. Again, tomorrow we're going to be covering pin maps and showing those. And then I invite you to come out to any of the other monthly trainings that we have. Beginning of the month, the first Wednesday and Thursday. We always do a beginning and then a subject-specific, topic-specific. Don't be intimidated by being called advanced. It just simply means that we're not doing pure beginner. We're gonna deep dive into one of the features of the program. Did I show where the recordings are? Yes, I did, but I can do that again. So I'm going to end the training. I'm going to stop the recording right now, and then I'm going to go show you one. Well, I'll show you where the recordings are located. So thanks for attending. Stopping the recording now.